I want to start this video with a story and see how you respond, because your response to the story will answer the video's main question, which is the US strategy towards Taiwan correct? This story starts like many other stories, and we have two opposing forces. Let's call them Superpower A and Superpower B. These two superpowers have different ideas about how to run a country in the world. Superpower A has been expanding its global reach and is trying to force other countries to join their side, but Superpower B is opposed to this expansion because they see the world differently. Next to Superpower B is a small island, and this island is politically aligned with Superpower A. This small island is independent, but has a long history with Superpower B, and Superpower B is salty about that history and feels it should have more control and influence over the small island. Because tensions are building between the two superpowers, Superpower A is thinking of sending military aid to the small island that they are politically aligned with because they want to protect their ally. This is basically a standoff, and Superpower B is threatening a blockade of the island if Superpower A sends military support. That is the story. The question is, which superpower is right? Superpower A that is looking to support an ally, or Superpower B that is trying to stop that support and threatening war? If you answered Superpower A is right to support their ally, congratulations, you are a communist. Because the above story is not about Taiwan, the US, and China, it is about Cuba, the US, and the USSR. The above story is the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, in which the US blocked aid shipments and military assistance to Cuba, threatening a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. In this story, the USSR is Superpower A, and was looking to support Cuba, and the US was Superpower B, that basically committed an act of war against Cuba by setting up a blockade. Fast forward to 2023, and every news report seems to be about the coming war with China and how the US needs to make Taiwan a prickly target by sending military aid and training Taiwanese troops. There is a growing rhetoric in the Western media that China is going to invade Taiwan and the US and its allies need to defend the island. The only problem with this rhetoric is there is little evidence to support an invasion. There hasn't been a Bay of Pigs or overt action by the Chinese government beyond the normal actions to suggest an invasion. The Chinese government, because it considers Taiwan part of China, has and will continue to fly jets around Taiwan's airspace and sail ships near Taiwan's maritime boundaries. This can be seen as a provocation, but this doesn't mean an invasion is imminent, because it has been going on forever. It is not new. What is new is the desire and political will for the US to arm Taiwan. In the past, the Taiwan issue was inconvenient, but it wasn't worth starting a war over, because working with China was more beneficial. Now it seems the assessment in Washington is changing, and they are looking to push Taiwan into conflict with mainland China. This is dangerous because China is a major military power, and conflict in Asia could spill over into other regions, creating the next World War. If the conflict in Europe is still ongoing by the time something happens in Asia, we could be looking at a world war, which wouldn't benefit anyone. For around the last 75 years, the Taiwan issue has been pretty stable, with a few ups and downs, but overall it hasn't led to war. The idea that all of a sudden China is planning an invasion and is looking to take on the US and its allies is pretty far-fetched in my opinion. China has nothing to gain from military conflict with the US. The only thing that could possibly be gained is unification of China. But at what cost? Mainland China would be destroyed, and even if President Xi went down in history as the president that unified the nation, he would also go down as the president that destroyed the nation. Knowing that China has very little to gain in a conflict with the US, especially since their reunification plan has been working, we have to look to the US to see what they would gain from a conflict. Once we start to look at what the US would gain, it becomes obvious why the US is pushing for war in Asia. I was just watching a live stream with Cyrus Jansen and a bunch of Alexes, and Cyrus made a comment about winning a war with China. He basically said the US wouldn't win, but I feel he's overlooking the bigger picture. The US doesn't win wars by design. He rightfully pointed out that the military greatly influences the US government and that the military-industrial complex receives the biggest budget in the world. but I think he's missing the bigger picture, which is winning isn't profitable. I don't want to be hard on Cyrus because I actually like his opinions, and I think he is pushing many of the same ideas that I support. But in this case, I think it is important to look beyond the idea of winning or losing, or at least redefine what it means to strategically win a war. If winning a war means defeating the enemy army or destroying the country's manufacturing capabilities, then Bush was right when he said mission accomplished. But if the MIC needs to justify their $800 billion US budget every year, ending a war in 2 months isn't strategic. We also have to understand enemy containment strategies and why we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan in the first place. The US was containing Iran, and the wars in the Middle East were about protecting our ally, the Saudis, in their oil production, while also containing Iran. Since 2001, things have greatly changed in the region, and the US is no longer dependent on Saudi oil, which is why the wars are winding down. The problem with ending a war is how do you justify your budget, which is why all of a sudden Ukraine needed help from the US. This again is about spending their budget in containing an enemy. Russia is seen by many as an enemy of the West or NATO, which is why the conflict was set up and started. I'm not an expert on the Russia and Ukraine war, but the timing is pretty convenient. This conflict will continue for the next 2 or 3 years, and then the MIC will focus on Taiwan and China. This is already being predicted by generals and analysts. The US is setting the groundwork now for a conflict with China over Taiwan. If you look at the history and look at the current media, you will be able to see the pieces falling into place. You might be asking what the US would actually gain from this, and I can see 3 main benefits. First, the MIC will be able to continue their war games and profit from destruction in manufacturing weapons. Second, the US would destroy a major manufacturing country and break the growing influence that China is gaining around the world. Some might argue that destroying China's manufacturing isn't good for the US, and I would say that is only partly true. Going into greater detail about reshoring manufacturing to automated factories in the US is a topic for another video, but there are many strategic advantages to having more control over your supply chains. This last year has made that very clear. And finally, the third obvious reason is the debt traps that wars create. Selling weapons to countries is profitable. But most countries have limited budgets, so the US can loan money that they just printed to countries to buy weapons, creating the perfect debt trap, because weapons treaties and bans make it almost impossible for countries to resell those weapons to pay off their debt. So back to the main question of this video, is the US strategy with Taiwan correct? I guess each person has to answer that question for themselves. Do you think the US has the right to invade or create conflicts around the world for profit under the banner of democracy? Do you think it is right for any country to provoke or start a war with another country? Defense is one thing, but provoking or starting a war is another. Let me know in the comments below if you think the US is provoking this conflict in Taiwan, or do you think China is responsible for the increased tensions? Also, do you think Asia is headed for war? I will make another video soon about the new arms race in Asia, but until then, you might find this video interesting. I hope to see you over there.